You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 598, where tonight we're going to break down Jedi Knights, issue number 1. This is the brand new comic by Marc Guggenheim and a gentleman who I'm going to need some help pronouncing their name. This is an ongoing series and one that I was looking forward to when it was announced, especially in lieu of where we're just coming off like the anniversary of the Phantom Menace. And anytime we get Jedi Knights in the prequel era, especially after the Living Force as well, it's just a really good time and a really nice time to kind of get some additional stories there. So to help me break all this down is, of course, Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. You are not on mute. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Yeah, for those, we have a little green room that you have whenever you're behind the scenes when Albert's doing a little intro, and I'm just over here like flagging him down, waving wildly, trying to get his attention. You get really focused on what you're doing, of course, but I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I'm not on mute, so thank you. But
hey, you're
great intro nonetheless. That will be cut out of the audio version, so
yeah,
don't want to be none the wiser.
Yeah. This is what we did. It's live, right? It's a live recording, so stuff's going to happen. Yeah, and thank you for everybody for calling me out in the chat that I was on mute. I do appreciate that as well. But yeah, man, this is we'll get into that here in a little bit. But I know you want to say thank you to some special folks that have joined us today and who are supporters of the show.
Yeah, thanks for all of our Cantina Cast Patreon members. There we go, Patreon members. CantinaCast.com/Patreon. There's where I was trying to go with this. You're not the only one having a bit of the Wednesdays here. CantinaCast.com/Patreon if you'd like to join Patreon, like some of these amazing people and are now part of the tribe. Alex, Raphael, Danny, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Riss, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Rita Born, and I've got a Brad feeling. And our Delusions Grandeur members are top tier. Now, this is Rod Racing, CJ, Steve, and Rob. Again, thank you all for all of your continued support at all the tiers. We certainly appreciate it. CantinaCast.com/Patreon. We just did a show this past weekend. What did we do, Albert? Earlier this week. Yeah, earlier this week. I just edited. You think I'd remember?
Yeah, I don't remember anymore either.
Waystation. Yes,
I'm just here, man.
Yeah, we did a Waystation talking a little bit about the Kathleen Kennedy news that broke last week. So if we'd love for you to go check some of that out. We shared a lot of opinions about where Lucasfilm and Disney might want to go. Some of the the caveats that go with some of that. We got to talk about a little bit of Kathleen Kennedy's legacy, just to touch on some of there too. So anyway, we'd love for y'all to go check that out. CantinaCast.com/Patreon. And if you're listening to this, thank you so much for the download. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. If you'd like to come out and join us on a live stream so you could see Albert mime at the beginning of a show. A fantastic experience that you have missed this fine evening. But again, you could join some of these amazing people on our live stream tonight already. Toon Raider, Stephanie, Alex, Skywalker's Academy, One versus CPU. We see you folks out there in the background as well. We hope you'll come and say hi. We certainly appreciate it. And this is something we've had set up for a few weeks, and I keep forgetting to tell everyone about it. But if you'd like the lowest price on any Cantina Cast merchandise, like t-shirts, stickers, anything like that, CantinaCast.com/store or /shop, whatever you remember to actually plug in. We have a new store set up. We've lowered the prices as low as we could possibly go in the store to help try to offset some of the shipping and stuff. It's still through TeePublic, but a kind of a different version of it. But if you go through that link, I know I link them on YouTube now, but if you go through that link, you'll get the absolute lowest prices you can get. And we're hoping that's kind of a win-win if you want to refresh some of your Cantina Cast merch. It's kind of a win for us as well and how they structured things, but we're trying to offset some of that for y'all. And we're not in it to make a ton of money or anything. We just want to, if you guys want to support the show in a different way, we'd like to give you all an opportunity. So again, thank y'all for people who have done that in the past. CantinaCast.com/store or /shop. We'll get you over to that if you are curious.
Yeah, and when he says the lowest price we can give, it's like, that's literally, they wouldn't let us, click it down any more dollar amount. So that's, we're not trying to make money off this stuff. So, but yeah, I've got a couple, I need to replenish my wardrobe as well, because they're starting to fade now after a few years. But,
hey, you can get great shirts like this one, Cantina Cast Coffee Company.
Yeah, that is a good one.
Someone actually said, like, "You're actually doing coffee now?" I was like, "I wish, but
Yeah.
no, we're not."
Not yet. We need more Patreon members before we get into that lucrative business of coffee.
Well, coffee's about to like double in price too. Some of the stuff happening in South America. So yeah, bad news on the coffee front. Anyway, Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars. Wait, before we get going, so just a reminder, we won't be here this weekend. So no show there. We'll probably come back and do some Andor coverage. We've had a lot of stuff that's come out this week. I anticipate we'll get some more stuff, by Friday, if not maybe even Monday or Tuesday, but we'll come back on Wednesday next week and kind of pick things up from there. Just expect a lot more Andor coverage here very soon. So that's going to be fun looking at teasers. And when we finally get like an official trailer, that's going to be nice to have as well, because we really haven't had one just yet, in my opinion. But
Right.
All right. So at least tonight, let's talk about, let's get into the show. Let's get into kind of talking about Jedi Knights #1. We're going to do some non-spoiler kind of initial thoughts, and then we'll go into kind of a synopsis of what happens in this issue for anybody that hasn't picked it up or just wants to kind of get the meat and potatoes of what's going on. And then we'll get into our discussion. And so that'll all be the spoiler activity. So this particular issue, #1, is brought to you by, like I mentioned at the very top of the show on mute, Marc Guggenheim is the writer. Medibek Musabekov, I believe is how you pronounce that. I said that like 8 times before we went on air, and I still screwed that up probably. But that is the artist. And then the cover artist for this one was Raza. And I just want to say, like, I posted something today on Blue Sky, and I tagged Mark, and I just said, look, it's great that we have good writing in Star Wars. And I'm not attacking anybody or saying anything about any of the existing writers, but Marc Guggenheim is somebody who he's a prolific writer. He must have done like at least 2,000 issues of Amazing Spider-Man that I recall. And I was really broke that entire run, because it was like one every month, every week they were releasing those.
Yeah.
But there's just something about his writing that for me, it's like, it's top of the line. And so that's really nice that you've got the Marvel talent over there kind of spilling now over. We've seen this before, right? But the Marvel talent spilling and coming and doing stuff over in Star Wars. I really appreciated the quality of the writing in this issue. But man, I got to tell you, man, this person, Medibek Musabekov, there's some really, really good stuff in here. Like, I don't know much about them and how much they've done, what other pieces they've done, other books they've done. But I'm excited to see what else they do in this one, because there was some stuff in here that was absolutely phenomenal. The layouts, and then the coloring is great too. I forgot to mention the color of the art. We usually don't, but there was something about the colorists on this one and the inker that was just mind blowing throughout the entire issue. So I feel this is a really good start to an ongoing series, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But I guess on the creative team, what did you think about what they've assembled here?
Yeah, we all have our preferences on writers, and Marc Guggenheim is just one of those staples that, he just solid work all the time. And so it's really great when you have that stability, you have good writing, you have good visuals, it all just kind of comes together. And even with these first introductory issues, sometimes these are like really loud bangs, and sometimes they take a little while to find their momentum. This was kind of a good solid story. We'll talk a little bit about it. But this is really cool. And if you love more realistic covers, like Raza, this is a nice wraparound cover. So if you actually get the physical book, both the front and the back are a continuation of this, kind of like what you've shown with some of the High Republic book covers that we've had over the years for the special editions of those. But if you love realistic photos, and we use it for the title card, of course, so Raza stuff is always, it never disappoints, and you get kind of unique flavors of the characters as well. So it really worked pretty well. And I like how this issue, well, again, we'll get into the thing altogether, but creatively, I like where this is going. I think they kind of tease us in some right ways too. So I think pretty good start here.
Yeah. So I want to talk just quickly about the ongoing series. And I mean this in probably the most positive and flattering way. There is something about this comic that when I was reading it, it's just, maybe it's the format, maybe it's because I'm familiar with Mark's writing or whatever it is, but there was something very familiar about it. It felt like an ongoing Marvel flagship title. I don't know how to say it any other way, but it didn't feel like a limited series that we've seen from Star Wars. It didn't even feel like some of the other Star Wars quote ongoing series that we've had. It's very traditional in that sense. And if you know what I'm saying, it just felt familiar, right? You get the sense that there's going to probably be kind of like this, each one of these stories is going to have its own kind of beginning, middle, and end, yet there's still kind of an ongoing narrative. We got that. It feels like, and from the previews, we know that we're going to get some Monster of the Week issues as well. So that's kind of fun to have. But I love the fact that it does feel like it's like the second flagship title, if you will, but only set during the prequel era, because there are a lot of stories that are to be told. And the fact that we've got a young Obi-Wan in this one, along with some new characters that we'll talk about here in just a little bit, I felt like it was a great start. Like you said, it was a very balanced start to a number one. A lot of times, I think you kind of mentioned this, sometimes it's way over the top on the action, or maybe on the letter or like the pencils. Maybe sometimes it is the writing. But you never really get all three at the same time. And this one kind of felt like it was kind of ticking the boxes on everything. So it just felt like a more mature title, even though it's the first issue. Am I making sense here? Did you get that sense as well?
Yeah, actually, that last part I think is actually really interesting. A mature title. I think, we step into a story kind of in motion, right? Jedi have already made a decision, but you get acclimated to it, and then you don't have to wait until the last page to kind of get the cliffhanger of where the series is actually going to go. You start to already get a feel for some of that, and you get a couple of different angles. I think what's unique about this, and what, like your comments about this feels like a flagship, I'm curious to see how we'll feel about that as it goes on, because the premise of Jedi Knights, while it's ongoing, is it really follows like a pair of Jedi. I don't know if it's each issue or
I think it is. I think it's supposed to be each issue, but they might deviate from that too from time to time, but that's generally, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious how that flows, right? We're always kind of curious about the flow. Comic books can get away with a lot, but they all kind of fit an overall narrative, which I think is going to be interesting to do. Does it feel fragmented, or does it feel like, no, they all are kind of wrapping around and doing this, but they're doing it all in one issue or in one series, rather than making you bounce between series. So if you look at what like typically the Spider-Mans and even the High Republics do, you have these little breakout issues where it goes into X-Men or it goes into Black Cat or whatever, and you have to kind of collect them all in order to get the full story. It'd be interesting if this one kind of feels like it's doing like an event type of thing, but it's really all contained within one series. You just got a dozen different characters you got to keep up with. So I think that's where the longevity of the ongoing series can be interesting to let play out, is because you have a lot of time, depending on how many issues you want to go. If it's 25 issues or 50 issues, we don't really know exactly. But, if it goes that long, you have quite a bit of lead time and a lot of road ahead of you that you can go and really kind of flesh some of this out within a couple of issues each and get a pretty good story, and then still tie it all together if you want to.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of experiment here of how this might work. And I'm curious to see where it goes. This was an encouraging issue to start.
And at the very end, we get the hook that kind of, leads, of course, into the next issue and makes you wonder, like, what's going to come up next. Was that hook big enough for you? Like, do you feel like and for you, or do you think just general audiences, whether it's somebody who is a lifelong collector of Star Wars comics versus someone who's like, wow, I grew up in the prequel era and this is a comic that's for me. I don't collect comics. Let me go see what this is about. Do you think that's enough to hook them at the very end?
I guess it depends on which part of the hook you're talking about. I mean, maybe we need to do the summary so we don't tease people out too much. But if it's the Obi-Wan aspect of it, no. But if it was the, what's his name? I keep forgetting the new characters' names here.
Alpha Prime?
Barum. Barum and Qui-Gon, kind of that angle was actually pretty interesting. And then, we are, the last page, we got some canon or some legends kind of links that are going to be interesting to follow too. But maybe we should jump into that question kind of once we do a bit of an overview here.
Yeah, hold that thought. I do want to come back to that because I want your opinion on that. So
yeah.
All right, so I'm going to get into spoilers now. So if you haven't read the comic, you don't want to be spoiled, turn it off, come back, watch it after you've had a chance to read it, purchase the comic, etc.
Yeah. First, thanks to Marvel for sending this as a preview as well. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, we got this on Monday, and I immediately
you were ready to tear into it. I know
I was ready to tear into it. Yeah, I was, and I didn't get a chance to finish it until I think last night or yesterday. But nonetheless, today it's actually out and in comic book stores today as of this recording. So, all right, so let me give you a quick synopsis, and then we'll kind of get into some of the talking points and some of the finer moments here of the comic. So a contingent of Jedi Knights has been sent by Chancellor Valorum to the planets of Vikura and Syrinx Prime. These are two new planets. In an effort to bring about an end to their planetary fighting. While Yoda, Mace Windu, Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, and others try to stop active fighting on the planet of Syrinx Prime, Qui-Gon Jinn and Jedi Knight Barum Kana meet with the leader of Vikura, a gentleman by the name of General Lafko. There, Barum Kana fails to use a Jedi mind trick to force General Lafka to withdraw his troops from Syrinx Prime, making the tensions even worse. As they take their leave, Kana and Jinn are attacked by a mysterious assailant wielding two purple energy swords, who manages to escape, but not before accidentally cutting off a piece of Qui-Gon's robe. And that sounds kind of weird, hold that thought. There's more coming on that a little bit later. Meanwhile, while that's going on, Jedi Adi Galea and Sira Longa, which is a new character, stumble across a prisoner camp on the planet of Syrinx Prime, where they find not only prisoners of war, but also women and children. This comes up later when all the Jedi come together to discuss their findings, and they determine that neither of the planets, Vakura or Syrinx Prime, are innocent or victims in this conflict. They've all got their baggage, and they're all to blame here for a lot of different things. So in response, the Jedi decide that they're going to bring about peace by destroying all offensive and defensive capabilities of both planets in an effort to neutralize them so that their peaceful talks can begin. And it works. I want to talk about that because that's one of the more intriguing aspects of this comic here. And then after the Jedi return to Coruscant, so that kind of ends kind of the main conflict of this issue. They go back to Coruscant, and this is where Baram Khana, the guy that was with Qui-Gon Jinn, he discovers that that piece of fabric that came off Qui-Gon Jinn's robe has actually got a tracker that's somehow woven into the fabric itself. And they come to the conclusion that whoever that attacker wasn't necessarily going after them both, but more specifically was going after Qui-Gon Jinn, trying to kill him. The issue ends with Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's training with Master Yoda, and while he's training through the Force, he starts getting visions of the future. He sees a future that ends with Qui-Gon Jinn's death, not at the hands of Darth Maul, but at the hands of that same attacker that attacked him on that planet of Vakura. And so it kind of cliffhangs there, right? So why don't we just kind of pick up real quick here? So that cliffhanger for me, I felt like was enough for me to be like, well, that's kind of cool. I think I was probably more interested and intrigued by all the visions, because some of those were kind of really cool and like, whoa, made you think. Especially there's a Emperor Yoda in there, which is like frightening to think about.
And Tomb Raider called it out in the chat too. You have old Obi-Wan battling Padawan Obi-Wan as well, which was really curious.
I know, and I was looking at that particular one. I'm glad you brought that up, Tomb Raider, because I was looking at that and I thought, is that him fighting himself? And I thought, well, maybe they're like, this is Sabayoth, or no, I'm kidding. No, maybe I was thinking maybe it was going to be some Jedi. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But maybe it was going to be some Jedi they found that looked like him. But the more I looked at it, I was like, oh no, crap, that's him fighting himself there. So what the hell does that mean? But it was a great visually. It was a really stunning layout too, the way they had done that. Again, kudos to the artists on this one. But there was some really intriguing stuff on there. So I think you've got the cliffhanger of, we all know he's not going to die, not at the hands of this assailant, right? But you also have, the visions, and how much of those visions. I mean, we even got a clear shot of Atha Prime, which I know I already spoiled at the top of the show. A Legends character. Pretty excited to see what Marc Guggenheim does with that character and how he fleshes him out and gives him, more background. I'm hoping that we get more than just kind of, one issue with him. It would be really nice if we got a lot of it there. But so let me pause there and I get your thoughts. So just kind of maybe on that hook question, come back to that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, the Qui-Gon angle I think was really interesting with the tracker on him. I thought this was probably a little more interesting than maybe some of the Obi-Wan stuff in some regard of, is this Palpatine already tracking and identifying Qui-Gon Jinn as kind of he's really the fulcrum and that tipping point for the Jedi, and identifying that he is the one, if you remove him from the equation, things really do start to unravel. He's the moral compass, right? And Tomb Raider at the beginning of the show before we came on, it said that he just read, I believe it's Tomb Raider, that said he had just read Living Force. Yeah. Which I think is a great tie-in with this comic book, actually, because not only do you have a lot of the similar characters and the similar kind of conflicts of where should we be focusing, but you see the importance of Qui-Gon Jinn's contributions to the council in particular of direction and what should they be focusing on, not just the philosophical, but the living aspect of how they serve the Republic. And you see that if he's been targeted well before Anakin Skywalker came around, you start to see that someone else had already identified that he is that most important person, despite all the power around the council itself. He's the one that can make the huge difference and will set the Jedi in one direction or another. And his lack of presence, again, does that create a tipping point for Count Dooku? There's so many directions you can go with that. So I thought that was actually the most interesting aspect of how far back does the conspiracy to kill Qui-Gon Jinn really go? And like how long, if it's Palpatine, we're just kind of assuming it's Palpatine at this point. If it is, like how far has this been? Like when did he see this? And we don't quite know how far in advance of the Phantom Menace this comic is. It feels like it's probably maybe a year or two, something like that. But just how far back does that conspiracy go? And I think that's really fun to debate, and I think it's continue to accentuate why Qui-Gon is so important, especially since Dark Horse is doing a Hyperspace Stories Qui-Gon Jinn story right now that's coming out here just shortly as well. So it's kind of interesting the synergies we might get between these books. I think with the Obi-Wan visions, they were quite striking though. The panels themselves were just amazing collages. You have Dooku and Yaddle Dooku with his red saber facing down Yaddle in a quadrant of it. Of course, you get at the Prime, which was a great Easter egg for a lot of people that are familiar with that, and how many times they've kind of teased and tried to get at the Prime to come back, even in the more recent Legends, like at the very end of Legends, they were trying to come back, like in Luke Skywalker Shadows of Mendor and some other things. They were kind of teasing things there. So it's cool to see that character pop up and maybe canonize. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But then also all of these alternate realities of sorts. Like you pointed out Yoda with, a ball of lightning in his hand with a cloak, and, Obi-Wan dealing himself. You get Kelleran back in there, and a couple other images too with Mace Windu going crazy. But just striking art, of course, but the possibilities. And I think it also goes back to Obi-Wan is on a handstand, lifting stuff just like Luke on Dagobah when Luke starts to have those visions. So it's a very callback to Empire Strikes Back too, which I thought was really, a lot of fun. And it's always cool to see that moment. And of course, the enthusiasm of Obi-Wan, freaking out basically that someone's going to kill his master.
Yeah.
And it ends up being a red herring here, but it also shows you the nature of the Force of maybe that was a real future at one point with this assassin that they encountered, but something changed in order to shift it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, always fluid is always in motion is the future kind of thing. And some of this, does turn out to be true. It's not, we know it not to be depicted exactly like this, but Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon does die, and he does get something stuck through his chest, similar to how he dies in the comic here. We know that Dooku is going to eventually kill Yaddle, so some foreshadowing there. There were a couple of other panels there too, or images of what I suspect will be foreshadowing of future panels or stories. Like there was one in there where they had Sierra Long, one of the new characters. She's underwater and she's using her lightsaber to cut herself free of like a bunch of tentacles. We had one where we had Vecna Mooncrest, who's another Jedi that was introduced, and she's fighting some kind of, it looks like some kind of a beast of sorts, a monster of the week type thing.
Almost looks like a nameless of sorts, like a
yeah,
weird,
that's what I thought.
Weird
too.
leg like it. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that was intentional, but yeah, you can just see that leg looking there as well. And there was one other one too. What was the other one that stood out to me? Oh, it was when I guess it was Jango Fett fighting Domino from the from Marvel. I guess I don't know who that was. No, I'm kidding. I don't know who that was, but it, again, it was just really, it was nice. I know we're kind of starting at the end, but it's fun to really talk about that. And I just love anytime we get that stuff. So, but let's back up. I want to talk just quickly. I want to open up and kind of talk about the new characters that were introduced. So we've got 3 new characters introduced in this comic. We've got Baram Kana. It's really cool. In each one of the characters, when they're first brought in, introduced into this comic, Guggenheim gives a kind of a little brief description of who they are. For he was listed as overconfident, recently knighted. And then you've got Vecna Mooncrest, who she's listed as headstrong and fierce. And then we've got Sierra Longa, who's listed as calm under pressure, recently knighted. So we've got two brand new, very fresh green knights in this group, as well as Vecna Mooncrest we didn't really get to know of. Of course, the one character we do learn the most about in this comic is Baram Kana. And I have to say, I like the dynamic of that kind of buddy cop duo that they've got between him and Qui-Gon Jinn. I thought that was very interesting. I like the fact that throughout the comic, he was making observations and just little quips, verbal quips to Qui-Gon Jinn that Qui-Gon was picking up. And he seemed to be very impressed with just how witty this guy was. And even though he is kind of, overconfident, a little arrogant at times, he's almost kind of like got that Obi-Wan Kenobi flair to him in some ways. But I guess, what are your thoughts on all 3 of the characters? Even though I know it's not fair because Vecna Mooncrest and Sierra Longa, we got very, very little screen time for them. I will say this just too, before you answer there, I think it's Sierra Longa is going to be featured in the next comic. I think it's her and Yoda on some kind of a mission together. But your thoughts, I guess, on the new characters that were introduced here.
Yeah, like I said, we spend the most time with Baram, who's not really a super likable character. And then towards the end, you start to see the competence coming out, and he becomes a little more relatable, which I think is important for this era of the Jedi. And I think it kind of establishes where we're at without poo-pooing all over the Jedi again. They do have a bit of brashness to us, especially the new Jedi Knights maybe trying to prove themselves and prove that they're there. And granted, the entire like half the council is on this mission, and then they have a meeting later on with the rest of the council all there via hologram. So they are in the mix of all of these masters, like the premier Jedi of the Order around them. So again, trying to maybe make a little bit of a name for himself is Barham, but again, a nice pairing with Qui-Gon Jinn, that stoicism and the things that we love about Qui-Gon, I think come out very well on the page, and including a little bit of witty humor from Qui-Gon of trying to make a joke that definitely falls flat with this other guy. But
yeah,
but it was cool to see that. But you see the competence come through when they settle and kind of let go of the ego, and we've seen this with a number of the Jedi, even the ones that feel like they're just a little too brash for their own good, and they come back and they show you why that they are, why they were knighted, why are they worthy of being in this order, and that the Jedi do have great qualities about them, which I think is probably going to be shown throughout here. Now, I think the story with the with the conflict in some of what the two parties were, I mean, it was just kind of a stage, really. It
Right.
didn't really have a whole lot, but I think it also shows you a bit of the Jedi Council in particular of jumping in with both feet before having all of the information, right? And that's where Sierra, comes in, as she's paired up with Adi Gallia, and they're trying to they uncover kind of this mysterious aspect of it, where they find this camp of prisoners of women and children, and including older people too, that don't seem like they're that much of a threat. So they start to call BS on both parties, but they kind of jumped in without doing that, which I think also really is consistent with what we see in the Phantom Menace and throughout the Clone Wars, of just kind of jumping in without all the facts. And they kind of regret, maybe not regret, but they have moment of pause of like, well, yeah, we probably should have
Right.
paused and done this. And this goes back to Living Force with Qui-Gon, of saying, if we pause and we focus on what the Living Force is telling us, would we have made a better decision, right? And I think this really feeds that story well that we've had before.
Yeah, it's hard to tell too. Like, I don't know where this story fits in the timeline. I actually haven't looked, and I'm sure someone's probably done the math, or maybe it's come out in an interview, but where does this fall in line with the Living Force? I suspect this has got to be before. And I only say that because in the Living Force, Qui-Gon made such a strong-hearted effort to really get through to them to say, look, we've got to start changing our ways. And now, coupled with this comic, it feels like, okay, this is one instance where, when we get to Living Force, he's going, hey, I don't need to remind you of what happened back on Vakura and Syrinx Prime, right? And we just assume that kind of happened. So it is par for course for the Jedi at this point. They are at their height. They really don't have a threat around them. The Nihil are gone. They've been living in this world of peace for a while. And so they are going to jump in feet first. They are going to be arrogant. They are going to be brash. They're going to make really quick decisions when they really should have just sat down and, trusted the Force, listened to the Force, take its guidance, follow the Living Force, whatever it is. But there's something about this issue too. Like, and I want to just kind of segue now into this whole, the Jedi Knights, whether they're not truly the guardians of peace and justice. That idea of them going in, like in my head growing up, I think they were always warriors, right? As a kid, they were always warriors, similar to what Luke Skywalker kind of envisioned and thought of the Jedi Knights. It wouldn't be until we get to really the prequel trilogy before we realize, okay, that really wasn't exactly the case. They were guardians of peace and justice. And for the most part, I would say during the prequel trilogy, they certainly act like it until they get thrust into the middle of a war. You know what I mean? Then at that point, they're just warriors and soldiers again. So they've been stripped of that. They've been robbed of that by Palpatine by design. But in this instance, I had never really considered that if you had, and not to bring real world into this, but it's very similar to any conflict in our real world that has been going on for so many years that people don't even remember exactly why that war started, right? First and foremost, fresh in my mind, of course, is Palestine and Israel. And you've got a similar kind of war that's going on here, right? These two people are fighting. It's very nuanced, as I think it's Lord Lafco says, it's very nuanced. There's, it's been going on there's part of it is like culture. It's ingrained in their culture just to kind of hate. There's prime examples of this too, like during the High Republic as well. There were a couple of planets that were at war for a number of years, and nobody could remember why. But it didn't ever dawn on me that the Jedi, with all their power, rather than sitting there like we saw in the Clone Wars, that they would aid certain groups to help and fight, and they would actually be in the war. They just put an end to the war. They disarm both sides, and they have the ability and the power to do it. I just wondered, did it feel out of character at all? Or do you feel like this is truly more in line with what the Jedi would have done? Let's say, I won't say the High Republic because they've been tied up with a bunch of other stuff. But, if you go back 800 years or back to the Old Republic, is this how you would have envisioned the Jedi Knights to have been as guardians guardians of peace and justice? Is it really, would they, go to do something like this where rather than taking a side, they just go and disarm everybody, take all their weapons away and say, sorry, you guys don't get to play this game anymore until you come to the table and start peace negotiations. And again, it works, it's effective, but it does feel like, I don't know, it's an interesting aspect, I guess, in the Jedi Knights.
Well, it's different even from the Phantom Menace, right? When they're sent to the Trade Federation, you're here to force a settlement, but they weren't there with aggression in mind. And again, they did try the diplomatic negotiating standpoint, it sounds like, before they jumped in. That all happens kind of before we get there, and there's some moments where that is still happening with Qui-Gon and Barham, of course, but it does feel a little bit out of character, though. I don't know if that's the path you're kind of, if that's how you feel, but I think it does feel a little bit of out of character. It almost feels like Mission Impossible, right? They need to go, and if we destroy all the weapons, they can't use them in the first place, right? And Marc Guggenheim does state this in the text, though, and I think I forgot who said it specifically. It was either Yoda, maybe it was Qui-Gon, but basically I think it may have been Qui-Gon. We deprived them of oxygen, right?
Yeah.
If you starve a fire by getting rid of the source of the, of the fuel, right?
The fuel, yeah.
And so if you do that, then the flames will extinguish. Now they kind of oversimplify that because at the very end they just show them shaking hands, just because we've gotten rid of all of their weapons and stuff. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of animosity. I mean, like you had pointed out, the culture and the historical environment between these these factions and these different people has been going on for generations, potentially.
Right.
So that it kind of summarizes that quickly is a little oversimplified, I believe, but it did feel very aggressive. And we get kind of a monologue from Yoda, talking to one of the leaders of like, this probably surprises you that the Jedi would take action, and it probably feels very overwhelming. It came across a little as almost boastful in some ways, and I don't know that may have been the intent, but it was just, Yoda was just probably laying it out there like, look, we are a force of nature, and when we are
and I
unleashed,
think sorry, I don't mean to cut you up, but I think there's two panels there. You've got you've got Mace Windu saying what you're talking about. He says, I take it you've never seen Jedi in action before. I imagine it's a little overwhelming for you. The Jedi Order can sometimes be like a force of nature. While that's going on, Yoda is actually talking to the other leader of the planet, and he's saying, agents of peace we are, but we fight when we must, and never more powerful are we when fighting for justice. But your point, well, you're making the best point here, honestly.
Yeah, they're kind of trading off during
Yes. Yeah, they're trading off on it. But you're right. Like, and Mace Windu's is probably more boastful. It's probably more arrogant, and so I can give him a pass. Yoda's is more around the side of like, yeah, we're peace and justice defenders of that.
Right.
But still, the actions themselves, and I don't get me wrong here. Like, I actually thought this was really cool. Like, it's it feels out of character, but at the same time, given the Jedi where they are, I can see them totally doing something like this rather than saying, we're not going to commit ourselves to a war. We're not going to go enlist. We're not going to go fight with our lightsabers side by side with them. They were truly just defending at the very beginning of the comic, realized that wasn't going anywhere. And so if you have this quote force of nature, no pun intended, with a contingent of Jedi that can go in and just neutralize the planet, level the playing field for both groups, why not do it? It seems like that would be kind of the direction they would go.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade a little bit, because that was some of the things that they were doing with the Padawans. They would have more covert type of missions where they would go in to disable key resources and things like that. It was not always front and center, all-out warfare like we would see in the Clone Wars specifically most of the time, but it was more of that subterfuge and going there and sabotaging and just eliminating their ability to make more of battle droids or whatever it might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily wanting to hurt people, but take out the things that create the things that hurt people.
Yeah.
Which I think is very consistent, right? How are the Jedi going to starve, this conflict if they can't get people to the table? I mean, at least they're removing from it. And again, they're thinking outside the box, I guess. And I think from Windu's perspective, it definitely probably feels like, hey, this is a great idea. I think that Yoda would buy into it. It's always a war with me and Yoda of like understanding. Like, he's very passive most of the time, but he can be very action oriented when he needs to be. And so sometimes it's just difficult to know which Yoda, like, where does Yoda really sit on some of these? And we know he's kind of compromising a bit and many times over especially these years in particular. So it's kind of difficult to know where Yoda truly feels and stands in some things because he just kind of navigates the water a bit. But it was really cool. I mean, the panels here in the art and the way that they exchanged the dialogue, I really loved it. And I think that the playing off the words and basically saying the same thing, but just slightly different perspectives definitely came across and really, I thought played out well. I think it made these scenes more interesting than they may have otherwise been with that combination of how they did the dialogue and coupling it with some really interesting panels, as well as how they carve up the page with the panels in very non-traditional ways.
Yeah, no, I was about to comment on that too. This is where I felt like Maddie Beck did like the best work, honestly. And they showcased this before the comic came out. These panels were released like about a month ago, I think, to kind of promo. And it really is probably the best artwork because you just got some really great action sequences here, a lot of detail. The one where we get to see, was it Vietnam Mooncrests?
Yeah.
You know, the one that's, quote, headstrong and fierce. She's kind of like using the force, disassembling one of the ships that's in the shipyard, like piece by piece. Like, you know, that's crazy. And then we got a little action shot here with Barum Kana, the guy that was with Qui-Gon Jinn. He's just lobbing like thermal detonators all over the place, just blowing up the armory that's being housed. You got a great scene in here with Qui-Gon Jinn doing a force push. There's all kinds of explosions behind him. We got a showcase panel for Sierra Longa, one of the new Jedi. And I don't know, she's just got like this whirling blade. You can just see the trail going all over the place. And then that final one I thought was the coolest one, where you've got Ki-Adi-Mundi and Shakti, who's, supposed to be like this. Yeah, we don't really get to see her a lot, doing the movies, of course, but she really gets to show her stuff here as they're kind of defending a whole group of people that are coming after him with blasters. So really great stuff. It's beautiful. It's very colorful. The way it's cut up is amazing. So really great stuff here.
Yeah, this is a nice one to probably have in print, so you can really appreciate it fully open on the page, like on both pages, and just have it without a break. It is probably much better than the digital type of copies we have here. So this is one that would be nice to go flip through.
Well, why don't we wrap up on this piece here? I do want to talk about just kind of that hook, right? We talked a little bit about it. This person that's after Qui-Gon Jinn. Yeah. Now, I'll be honest. I don't know that I truly understand, and I think this is probably meant to be this way, how that little tracker was woven into Qui-Gon Jinn's robe, number one, and then why it just happened to, I don't know, accidentally, coincidentally get cut off so that they could find it. It feels like it's a little too convenient. And I'm not saying that's a misstep on the storytelling. I think it probably was intentional. So all of that is very intriguing as well. But I do want to talk about this character that was attacking them. He looks like I don't know if it's male, female, or other, but they look like kind of like a Snake Eyes kind of character, like a poor man's Temu Snake Eyes kind of character. And they're wielding these two blades, which look like, maybe force pikes. Maybe I don't know if they're supposed to be kind of like lightsabers or have kyber crystals in them of some sort. I couldn't really tell if they had, a rod behind it or if it was truly energy only.
Right.
On top of that, they seem to have like the abilities of a Jedi, but they get all of their abilities through tech. So at one point, I forget now if it was Qui-Gon or if it was Bima, I forget now. One of them, it might have been Qui-Gon actually, gets a little too close, and on this character's arm is some kind of a piece of tech that's able to kind of like basically do a force push of sorts, right? It's kind of like this sonic blast that blows him back. And there was a lot of similarities between like the demonstration of abilities that they had, as well as the powers that they had through their tech that resembled what we would expect Jedi Knights to use, right? It's almost like they were kind of mimicking that through tech. And we see lots of examples like this in Marvel where you've got these characters that are like mimicking other characters and they don't have the super abilities, but they have a lot of money and they've got a lot of cool gadgets, kind of like Batman, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, I just wonder like what it is, that story. And I don't really have a good honest suggestion right now because it's so early on in this series, but I guess what are any thoughts around what you were seeing there? And do you think this is a character, this storyline? I guess this is going to be the through line through most of the issues, or at least the first several issues, but who possibly outside of Palpatine, which I thought was a great idea. I hadn't really considered that, but anybody else that comes to mind as to who would be tracking down Qui-Gon Jinn specifically?
Actually, no, I don't have any other candidates at this point. And it's probably just because we know where he goes. And I think we continue to see the importance of Qui-Gon. So it just seems to lead us in that direction that And again, if we take it at Palpatine, that he's hiring assassins, maybe Maul isn't ready for prime time. Maybe he's a little bit nervous about exposing them too soon. This isn't the right situation because there are a lot of the Jedi Council around. So getting a feel for what is capable and maybe assessing where Qui-Gon is actually at combat wise too of that skill. I think the embedding of the tracker in the robe though is really interesting because that feels like it's got to be an inside job, right? That has to happen on Coruscant, mostly of all places, because it's woven into the fabric to where it just, like you said, kind of conveniently, Barham, sees it and looks at every piece of evidence type of thing, which is, again, kind of kudos to him. But that has to be an inside job. That has to be at Coruscant. And I mean, who else would have the type of resources other than Palpatine would have that? And you have a lot of availability within the temple, and you have a lot of flexibility for some of these characters in this moment in time within the Senate, within the temple, and these interactions that they have. So there's opportunity potentially. Maybe they're in the dry cleaner and they just, they know, Palpatine's paid someone in the dry cleaner. I mean, realistically, it's possible, right? To quote Mark Hamill, it's possible.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think testing the waters a little bit, I would like that to be the case. Now, it could be, of course, the character that gets teased, right, with Atha Prime. And maybe that's an angle of trying to set up the Clone Wars overall and give us another pathway to how the Clone Wars kind of get rolling and get started and adapt that from Legends, because that's where Atha Prime, kind of originated in some ways, although a different extreme of it. But, it could be that that's a pathway to it as well. But why Qui-Gon? And the only thing I keep coming back to is that even the visions that Obi-Wan is seeing, Palpatine might be seeing those same visions as well. And understanding that I don't really know what it is or what it's going to be quite yet, but there's something about this Jedi that is very important and we need to take him out. Now, it's more important to take him out later because that really does set everything in motion, but we've identified the target. We just have to identify the right time and situation to make this happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't considered the Palpatine angle. I love that actually. But that does feel almost a little too familiar.
Right.
It probably is Atha Prime, just because he is the main baddie that they've introduced so far. Why is probably the hardest part to nail down because we just don't have a lot to go off of just yet. At some point he'll monologue and we'll understand exactly what his overall, goal is here. And then we kind of come to understand, okay, this is why the tracker was in there. Right. But yeah, somebody in wardrobe is working undercover for one of these people. So that's all interesting too. I do want to just quickly go to the cover of this comic. We get to see Dooku on here.
Yeah.
And as much as I know, I suspect that Dooku hasn't really completely turned over just because of Tales of the Jedi. We know that he was still doing the right stuff. And even though his methods were a little extreme, even back then, I suspect we are going to get a comic with him. Maybe it would be awesome to have him showcase with just anybody. I mean, I don't care who it is. But, maybe it's going to be... I
would love to see him with Qui-Gon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Those two paired up together, former Padawan and Master together on some kind of a mission would be, take all my money kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I hope this comic has a lot of potential because they could entertain, little bits and pieces of where he's starting to slip again. Or maybe he's being... pulled by somebody like Palpatine, as a senator during this time. Maybe he does make a cameo and we get to see some insight into what's going on there and just kind of that pull and that sway to get him over off of away from the Jedi Council. But yeah, very intriguing stuff. He's super excited if we get something with Count Dooku, especially if it's in that same kind of flavor that we got from Tales of the Jedi. And then there's a lot of other Jedi too. There's a ton of them on the cover here as well. So. Yeah. Again, this comic just is ripe with potential and a lot of great stories that they could tell. But yeah, I think Atha Prime is going to be a great character. I think because Mark's behind it, I have a feeling he's got something really big planned for him, and that would be kind of a redemption for a toy figure that was promised and never came out. So
yeah, do you want to give a little the history of Atha Prime?
Yeah,
for people who may not be as familiar with the character, because it is funny because the origins date back to 1984. So right. It's crazy how this character came about and never really gained traction.
Yeah, I mean, in short, and I'll keep this short because we're low on time here, but in short, this was a character that was after Return of the Jedi and the licensing was kind of done. Kenner was trying to figure out okay, now what do we do, right? We got to still milk the cow and figure out a way to make more money off this. And so they came up with their own characters. That they and Atha Prime was one of them. They had their own ships, and they had this whole plan of like this new saga, right? What does Star Wars look like post Return of the Jedi? They pitched it over to Lucas. Of course, that never panned through, but they had all the artwork, they had mock figures that were made up, they had the background story. And later on, I mean, there was people that were familiar with this. I mean, I think it even there were some marketing materials that were put out there, right, as well. So this actually did circulate at one point, and it felt like it was going to be a reality until it wasn't. And so you had people around that time that were still holding on to the character design, because it actually is kind of a cool character design. If you really, and we don't have a picture of it right now, but it's actually a really cool character design. So you've got people like Marc Guggenheim who just decided to pull this out of nowhere and come back to it. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. They tried to resurrect him literally during Legends, and that didn't never really work out. So, there's a great opportunity for this character to be something more than it had the potential to be, that just never happened.
Yeah, it's kind of curious the timeline, because like you said, originally developed as a post Return of the Jedi. And then they kind of tried to work him in as one of the reasons the Clone Wars got started. And now here we are in a prequel, type of story, and are going to see him. So maybe they're going to rework with that angle. But then how does that really jive with the whole Sifo-Dyas angle and all of those things that we really feel like were some of the original catalysts with Dooku?
Yeah.
Again, is this kind of an earlier moment to start some of that? Or is it completely unrelated now? We're just going to repurpose a really kind of a cool design of a character into this with flavors of the original aspect of him. The design is actually like verbatim what they did, so it's right on the money. But are they going to kind of repurpose a story aspect to just kind of work in a cool character design to make this work? That'd be interesting to see how this plays out, and if he's the big bad of the series right now, or if he's just a puppet as well. But in some of that Legends material, or what they were trying to do, he was a bit at odds with like the Palpatine angle of the Confederate systems as well. So he was a bit of an outlier in some ways too. So it'll be interesting to see how they massage this into the story and how it fits the overall narrative of bringing us into the Clone Wars era.
Yeah, I imagine he's probably got some clever way to kind of bridge those two stories together. So he does have us play in the Clone Wars and how it came about, but not directly in some ways, right? As a result of kind of thing. But yeah, we'll see.
Right.
Well, Alex just showed up. What did I miss? Too bad. Get out of here. Fast fall asleep. Love your work, guys. Thank you so much, man. Hey, before we get out of here, I know you want to say, how about some shout outs to the folks that joined us for the live stream?
Yeah, thanks for wanting to come out to the live stream. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. If you'd like to come out and see our smiling faces, you can join these amazing people: Toon Raider, Stephanie, Alex, Skywalker's Academy, One Up versus CPU, Fall Asleep Fast. If I missed anyone, not intentional. We see all the folks out in the background. We hope you'll come by and say hello next time. Hope you're excited about this comic book series. Hope you're enjoying some of the comic books we're able to bring all of late, and hope to continue to do that, and hope to revisit some of these as we get towards the end of Andor. We'll come back and revisit, see where some of these are at. So this will be fun. I'm glad we have a solid comic book to kind of come back and have some confidence in. I think Legacy of Vader, of course, is coming out here in a week as well. So that's another one we're going to be interested in following up with too. So, maybe my disdain for some of the Star Wars, where we were at with Star Wars comics, was a little premature, or maybe we're just in a bit of a lull for my preferences. So this is reinvigorating. So appreciate all of the work that goes into these comics, of course, and happy my attitude is starting to perk up a little bit.
Well, don't cut yourself a little too hard there, because
I was born.
There have been plenty of comics that started off really well and then just kind of all the way down.
It's tough to sustain these, right? It's tough to do it over. I mean, if you got to plan out 25 or 50 issues or however long the series might be, that's challenging to do and have all of that set out. So they've really got their work cut out for them. I really admire the whole creative process and people that do comics. And I follow, her name's like Miranda Art or something. And she kind of goes through, she's up in Canada and goes through kind of her process of creating her own comic book and what that looks like. And it just gives you a totally different appreciation for what goes into it and how much effort and how much planning goes into it, and how early and how far in advance you have to do, especially if you're doing a creative, like a new work with creating brand new characters and stuff. But I imagine stepping into Star Wars, mapping all of that out, having other opinions. What is Lucasfilm Publishing and Disney want to do, and Marvel, and Dark Horse, how does that all play into things? So it's got to be a challenging experience. That's why I love following like Charles Soule and Kevin Scott, because they usually pull back the curtain on some of that stuff too with their newsletters, which strongly recommend people go and subscribe to their newsletters. They're free. They send you, Kevin Scott's really good about keeping up with it. Charles Soule is about every month or so. But if you want to peek behind the curtain sometimes and get to know them and get to know the process, highly recommend you follow them and subscribe to them.
Yeah. And they're always well written. So
I see what you did there. But
no, well, there is a joke there, but yeah, they do a good job of the writing and, like you said, pulling back that proverbial curtain.
It's not fluff either. It's like, here's what's going on, and here's some witty humor sometimes, and again, where they're going to be at. So it's just kind of an all night, and it's really long usually. There's a lot of good stuff in there about what's happening, and I mean, what more could you ask? It's not just checking a box of like, hey, we sent you something. It's like, no, here's something meaningful. There's usually something of interest in there. Way
better than like social media, and what they can do in that space. So
exactly.
But all right, we'll end the show there. Thank you guys for joining us tonight for the live stream. Thank you to all of our Patreon members. Don't forget, we don't have a show this weekend. We'll come back next week. And until then, we'll see you guys on the next show.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.